Right up. Glory to God. Welcome back to your Happy Bible Study on CUBN. Let's get back into it. We are in Proverbs chapter 28, and we're going to start at verse 21. To have respect of persons is not good. The word says that God is not a respecter of persons. Okay? That means that you favor someone who's rich over someone who's poor. That you favor someone who's Jew rather than Gentile. That you favor someone who's male rather than female. And you get the idea. For a piece of bread, that man will transgress. So if you have respect of persons, someone who has respect of persons, who caters to the rich and ignores the poor, who is gender biased, who is race biased or anything like that, it says that someone who thinks like that, that for a piece of bread, that man will transgress. That's a quality of someone who's a respecter of persons. In verse 22, he that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye. You don't want to have an evil eye. He that hasteth to be rich. Hasteth means to hurry. You want to hurry to be rich. You don't want to work all your life to accumulate a retirement. This is the kind of person that hurries to be rich. And you have to hurt a lot of people to hurry to be rich. He that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye. Okay. Now, when you have an eye of light and an eye of darkness. Okay. The evil eye is the eye of darkness. The light or darkness of your eye is talking about your perception. If you have an eye that is full of light, you're an optimist. You are hopeful. You're a glass half full person. Okay. If you have an eye full of darkness, you're pessimistic, you're fatalistic, you just know everything's going to go wrong and be terrible. It's a perception when it talks about an eye full of light or an eye full of darkness. And it's kind of similar thing here, right here with this evil eye. If you're hastening to be rich, then your perception, your view, the way you see things is evil. And considereth not that poverty shall come upon him. He's not giving any thought whatsoever to the fact that there are consequences for his actions. In verse 23, he that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. So if you have someone who is willing to call you out when they see you doing wrong, you are going to trust that person more than someone who comes to you flattering you and telling you how great and wonderful you are. Because in many cases, when someone comes with over flattery, they just flatter you and flatter you, they're setting a snare for your feet. In verse 24, whoso robbeth his father or his mother, and saith, it is no transgression, the same is the companion of a destroyer. Now, what this is telling you is, if you take from your mom and dad, and you're telling yourself, that's not a bad thing because that's my inheritance anyway. Well, that kind of thinking reveals that you are the companion of a destroyer. You are someone who people want to lock their doors when they see you coming. In verse 25, he that is of a proud heart stirreth up strife, but he that putteth his trust in the Lord shall be made fat. Now, he that is of a proud heart stirreth up strife. Strife is like a fire, okay? If you don't add fuel to it, it burns out. But if you continue to add fuel to it and add, it becomes a huge bonfire. So if you have a proud heart, being prideful in yourself, you stir up strife. You like to just keep it going and keep it going. You're going to feed it and keep dishing it out. But he that putteth his trust in the Lord, shall be made fat. And it doesn't mean you're going to be 500 pounds. What that means is that if you put your trust in the Lord, you're going to have blessings overflowing. The term fat in this situation means that you have an abundance of blessings. In verse 26, he that trusteth in his own heart is a fool. But whoso walketh wisely, he shall be delivered. Now, if you trust in your own heart, it says you're a fool. Now, who is it that's a fool? The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. So the fool doesn't believe that there is a God unto whom he is accountable. He that trusteth in his own heart is a fool. As believers, we don't trust in our own heart. We trust in the King. Okay? But whoso walketh wisely, that is to it's to understand that we are nothing. We are dust before an almighty and holy God. You will be delivered if that is your outlook, that you are nothing before the almighty God, and you humble yourself and you listen to his word and you obey him. You're walking wisely if you obey the word, and you'll be delivered. He shows up to deliver his own every single time. In verse 27, he that giveth unto the poor shall not lack. If you are generous to those who are less fortunate than you are never going to be in their position, ever. You will have no lack. But now it doesn't say you'll be rich. It just says you will have no lack. And that would mean a lack of the basic necessities that you need. But he that hideth his eyes shall have many a curse. If you see the poor and you intentionally look the other way, you block them out, you don't want to deal with them, you're hiding your eyes and bringing curses upon yourself. So when someone who is poor is placed before you in your eyesight, you do not want to hide your eyes from that. You want to meet the need and consider it an opportunity that God has placed before you to bless you and rather than them. Because the blessing is yours when you give way more than the blessing is theirs. Okay. In verse 28, when the wicked rise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. So when the wicked rise to power, like people like George Soros and Pope Francis, men hide themselves because they are powerful and untouchable, basically. But when they perish, when people like George Soros and the Pope, when they perish, now the Pope, he's the Antichrist. We've proven this clear back in 2014, maybe in 2013 when he got his crown, but at least by 2014. That was like 4 years ago. We pegged him and proved he's the only man on the planet that biblically qualifies to be the Antichrist. And he remains the only man who biblically qualifies out there. But when the wicked rise, men hide themselves. But when they perish, the righteous increase. When wicked leaders perish, the righteous increase and become more powerful. But when the wicked are on the throne, like Caesars, the Caesars of Rome and things like that, the believers were having to hide for fear of persecution. And we have a similar situation coming up in the world as the prophecies continue to manifest, where you will have wickedness becoming more and more powerful in the world. And the church will be going back underground. Now that we've finished chapter 28 of Proverbs, let's go over to our study in Exodus. This is a really cool study that we've been in. We're in Exodus 27, verse 4 is where we're going to pick up our study. And this has been a very interesting study. It showed the children of Israel leaving Egypt, and that God has been giving them the instructions to build the Ark of the Covenant, the table of the showbread, the other temple vessels and instruments, and also the tabernacle. This is pretty cool. And so now we are in chapter 27, and it's talking about how they are making the altar and the measurements and all this. We are in verse 4. And thou shalt make for it a grate of network of brass, and upon the net shalt thou make 4 brazen rings in the 4 corners thereof. In Exodus 27, verse 5. And thou shalt put it under the compass of the altar beneath, that the net may be even to the midst of the altar. So try to picture this in your mind as the word describes it. And thou shalt make staves for the altar. The staves are like poles, that like what they carried the ark on. Staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with brass. And the staves shall be put into the rings, and the staves shall be upon the 2 sides of the altar to bear it. So this is a third tabernacle furnishing that has the poles that you carry it with, not just the ark. You had the table of showbread, and now you have the altar. So it is also, you're not supposed to touch it, okay, with your hands. These things are to be carried on poles by the priests. So in verse 5, and thou shalt put it under the compass of the altar beneath, that the net may be even to the, Okay, verse 8. Hollow with boards shalt thou make it, as it was showed thee in the mount, so shall they make it. Verse 9. And thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle, for the south side southward, There shall be hangings for the court of fine twined linen, of 100 cubits long for one side. In verse 10, and the 20 pillars thereof, and their 20 sockets shall be of brass. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver. And likewise for the north side in length, there shall be hangings of 100 cubits long, and his 20 pillars and their 20 sockets of brass, the hooks of the pillars and their fillets of silver. In verse 12, and for the breadth of the court on the west side shall be hangings of 50 cubits, their pillars 10, and their sockets 10. Verse 13, and the breadth of the court on the east side eastward shall be 50 cubits. In verse 14, the hangings of one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. In verse 15, and on the other side shall be hangings 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. In verse 16, and for the gate of the court shall be an hanging of 20 cubits, of blue and purple and scarlet, and fine twined linen, wrought with needlework, and their pillars shall be 4, and their sockets 4. In verse 17, all the pillars round about the court shall be filleted with silver. Their hooks shall be of silver, and their sockets of brass. In verse 18, the length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 everywhere, and the height 5 cubits of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass. All the vessels of the tabernacle in all the service thereof, and all the pins thereof, and all the pins of the court shall be of brass. In verse 20, and thou shalt command the children of Israel that they bring thee pure oil, olive beaten for the light, to cause the lamp to burn always. So they're using olive oil in the lamps. In verse 21, in the tabernacle of the congregation, without the veil, on the back side of the veil, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall order it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever unto their generations on the behalf of the children of Israel. Wow. Now this is going into a lot of technical detail about how to build the tabernacle and all of the furnishings. We'll go straight on into chapter 28 and verse 1. And take thou unto thee Aaron thy brother, and his sons with him, from among the children of Israel, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office, even Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, Aaron's sons. And thou shalt make holy garments for Aaron thy brother, for glory and for beauty. In verse 3, and thou shalt speak unto all that are wise-hearted, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom. See, it's the spirit of wisdom. Studying for years doesn't make you wise, and it doesn't even make you knowledgeable. Knowledge and wisdom are 2 of the 7 spirits before the king. So unless he gives those to you, you're never going to obtain those things. So he says, and thou shalt speak unto all that are wise-hearted. That's all of those born with the temple inside them, all right? Whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom, that they may make Aaron's garments to consecrate him. Consecrate means to separate out. So he stands out among the priests, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office. In verse 4, and these are the garments which they shall make, a breastplate and an ephod. The ephod is the plate that they wear, this big kind of rectangle looking one, that has 4 rows of 3 stones each, or 3 rows of 4 stones each, one of the two. I'd have to look at it again to remember which that is, but it has all of the stones that represent the 12 tribes, and a robe, and a broidered coat. Now this is a special coat that has embroidery. Okay, a mitre and a girdle, and they shall make holy garments for Aaron thy brother and his sons, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office, in the priesthood. In verse 5, and they shall take gold and blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen, and they shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, and of purple, of scarlet, and fine twined linen, with cunning work, very detailed and very artistic, talented work in these things. In verse 7, it shall have the 2 shoulder pieces thereof joined at the 2 edges thereof, and so it shall be joined together. And the curious girdle of the ephod which is upon it shall be of the same, according to the work thereof, even of gold, of blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine twined linen. And thou shalt take 2 onyx stones, onyx is black, remember, and grave on them the names of the children of Israel, 6 of their names on 1 stone, and the other 6 names of the rest on the other stone, according to their birth. Now this would be the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes, and the first 6 according to the order of their birth, which would be Reuben, Simeon, Levi, etc. on the first one, and then the other 6 according to their birth on the other stone. So the last ones would be Joseph and Benjamin. Okay? In verse 11, with the work of an engraver in stone, like the engravings of a signet, thou shalt engrave the 2 stones with the names of the children of Israel. Thou shalt make them to be set in ouches of gold. And thou shalt put the 2 stones upon the shoulders of the ephod for stones of memorial unto the children of Israel. And Aaron shall bear their names before the Lord upon his 2 shoulders for a memorial. So these stones are to go upon his shoulders here. And thou shalt make ouches of gold, and 2 chains of pure gold at the ends. Of wreathen work shalt thou make them. That's talking about kind of like leaves and branches and greenery. And fasten the wreathen chains to the ouches. In verse 15, and thou shalt make the breastplate of judgment with cunning work, that's artistic, after the work of the ephod thou shalt make it, of gold, of blue, and of purple, and of scarlet. And you know what these are, right? Of gold, you know what gold is, blue, purple, scarlet is red, like blood, and of fine twined linen shalt thou make it. In verse 16, 4 square it shall be, being doubled. A span shall be the length thereof, and a span shall be the breadth thereof. In verse 17, and thou shalt set it in settings of stones, even 4 rows of stones. The first row shall be a sardius, a topaz, and a carbuncle. This shall be the first row. And the second row shall be an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. See how specific God is with these things? He's not only telling them what stones to put in this ephod, but he's also telling them exactly the order he wants them in. In verse 19, and the third row, a ligure, an agate, and an amethyst. In verse 20, so it is 4 rows of 3 rather than 3 rows of 4. It is 4 rows of 3. And the fourth row, a beryl, and an onyx, and a jasper. They shall be set in gold in their enclosings. And the stones shall be with the names of the children of Israel, 12 according to their names, like the engravings of a signet. Every one with his name shall they be according to the 12 tribes. And you have the names of the 12 tribes of Israel over the 12 gates of the New Jerusalem. And you have the names of the 12 disciples on the foundation stones, the 12 layers of foundation stones, which I think you will find mirror these exact types of stones that are given for the ephod. See, the Old Testament is physical parables that show the Messiah, the holy city, all these things. The New Testament are spiritual parables. See, the physical parables of the Old Testament teach you how to control your physical body. The New Testament teaches you how to control the person within the body. Okay? And all of these, everything in the old is a picture of the new. And it's extremely interesting. If you study, you'll see these parallels everywhere in the scriptures. And the stones shall be with the names of the children of Israel. This is 21. 12 according to their names, like the engravings of a signet. Every one with his name shall they be according to the 12 tribes. In verse 22, and thou shalt make upon the breastplate chains at the ends of wreathen work of pure gold. And thou shalt make upon the breastplate 2 rings of gold, and shall put the 2 rings on the 2 ends of the breastplate. And thou shalt put the 2 wreathen chains of gold in the 2 rings which are on the ends of the breastplate. In verse 25, and the other 2 ends of the 2 wreathen chains thou shalt fasten in the 2 ouches, and put them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod before it. So he's being very intricate in describing the detail he wants for these priestly garments here for Aaron and his sons. In verse 26, and thou shalt make 2 rings of gold, and thou shalt put them upon the 2 ends of the breastplate in the border thereof, which is in the side of the ephod inward. And 2 other rings of gold shalt thou shalt make, and shalt put them on the 2 sides of the ephod underneath, toward the forepart thereof, over against the other coupling thereof, above the curious girdle of the ephod. And verse 28, and they shall bind the breastplate by the rings thereof, unto the rings of the ephod with a lace of blue, that it may be above the curious girdle of the ephod, and that the breastplate be not loosed from the ephod. In verse 29, and Aaron shall bear the names of the children of Israel in the breastplate of judgment upon his heart, when he goeth in unto the holy place, for a memorial before the Lord continually. In verse 30, and thou shalt put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Thummim, and they shall be upon Aaron's heart when he goeth in before the Lord, and Aaron shall bear the judgment of the children of Israel upon his heart before the Lord continually. In verse 31, and thou shalt make the robe of the ephod all of blue. In verse 32, and there shall be an hole in the top of it, in the midst thereof. It shall have a binding of woven work round about the hole of it, as it were the hole of a habergeon, that it be not rent. It's like a buttonhole, okay, where it's reinforced all the way around so it doesn't cause a tear in the material. That it be not rent. Rent means torn. In verse 33, and beneath upon the hem of it thou shalt make pomegranates of blue and of purple and of scarlet, round about the hem thereof, and bells of gold between them round about. A golden bell and a pomegranate, a golden bell and a pomegranate, upon the hem of the robe round about. So he's saying you alternate those, a golden bell, then a pomegranate, then a golden bell, then a pomegranate, and so on and so on. In verse 35, and it shall be upon Aaron to minister with his sound. Okay, I can hear Troy. He's going to take us to a quick break. When we come back, we'll start again at verse 35 in Exodus 28 right after this. Straight up.